I would like to welcome you all to the webinar, I've Had It Up to Here, Coping with Stress While Caregiving by Janet Edmondson. My name is Catherine and I'm the administrator for this webinar. The 23rd person who signs on for tonight will be the winner of our drawing for one of Janet's CDs, Affirm Yourself for Caregiver Challenges. We'll send this winner an email to request your address so that we can mail the CD to you. The winners for last webinar were Shelby Morris of Montezuma, Indiana. Please note that Janet's books and CDs are available on her website, www.affirmyourself.com, or you can order them from Amazon or your local bookstore. Janet will be presenting the next webinar on Tuesday, September 19th. The topic will be Feel Empowered While Caregiving. You'll receive the link to register in the follow-up email you're going to get tomorrow from us. And even if you can't make that date, please register anyway, because we will be recording it and we'll have it for you to watch later at your convenience. One last administrative item. To ask Janet a question, just type into the questions box, which is the panel to your right, and hit send. You can do this at any time during the webinar, and Janet will answer your questions at the end. Now I'd like to introduce Janet. If you've participated in our earlier webinars, you know that Janet took care of her husband Charles during the 5 years that he faced a movement disorder with dementia called cortical basal degeneration, CBD. Janet has a master's degree from Georgia State University, is past chair of the board of directors for Cure PSP, and has over 30 years of experience in the health promotion field. She currently resides in South Portland, Maine. Here's Janet.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you all of you caregivers for coming today. I know when you're stressed, when you've had it up to here, it's very hard to find the time to attend, so we really appreciate you being here. So I wanted to start with this quote from Irma Bombrick. If life is a bowl of cherries, what am I doing in the pits? And that's the way it feels sometimes when we're caregiving. That leads us to feeling like I've had it up to here. So to combat that feeling, in tonight's webinar, we're going to explore the concept of caregiver stress and how to cope and minimize it. So what actually is stress? Well, stress is the response of the body to any demand or stressor made upon it. And we have a lot of them when we're caregiving. And our body reacts to stressors with the, as you might have heard, the fight or flight response. That's when many of the systems in our body rev up to either run away as fast as we can or prepare for a fight. So what happens is our heart rate increases, our blood pressure goes up, and our muscles tighten to prepare for action. For humans in this modern society, the flight might be getting angry or argumentative. The flight might be us withdrawing socially, watching TV excessively, or drinking too much alcohol, as examples. The stress response is happening in the primitive part of our brain called the amygdala. A new study theorizes that the stress response from the amygdala triggers an inflammatory response that can then cascade into diseases like heart disease. So this is really big that we think about this and try to handle it as best we can in such difficult situations that we're all in. Unfortunately, this fight or flight response is not always helpful in our modern society. So when stress becomes chronic, with one crisis after another, it can compromise our long-term health as our bodies stay revved up, causing tremendous wear and tear. And I bet you all relate to that, one crisis after another, right? In addition, know that stress is different for each of us. So what stresses me may not stress you. What stresses your loved one may not stress you, and vice versa. So to get an understanding of that, think about children that you know. One child might be scared to death of a large dog, while another child might run right up to it and give it a big hug. And it is the same dog. So it all starts, our stress starts from our specific unique perspectives and perceptions. That's where our stress originates. To combat that, we need to become aware of our perceptions and try to get more realistic view of them. So as we get started, I want you to take a moment. If you have a piece of paper and pen, just jot down what you feel is stressing you lately. What is specifically making you feel like you've had it up to here? And I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. And if you don't mind, some of you, if you wouldn't mind, stick those ideas in the question box, and we'll look at them later. So if you've got some ways of things that are stressing you, let's share, because I think it'll make you feel excited to, not excited, but more comforted to know that other people are feeling some of the same things. So let's take a look at some of the symptoms of caregiver stress that I got from the Alzheimer's Association. While specific to caregivers of people with dementia, I think these impact caregivers of people with any other condition. So there's denial, anger, social withdrawal. Sometimes that's because we don't have time. Sometimes that's because of the next two things. We have anxiety or depression. And then there's exhaustion that just comes with the relentless tasks that we have to do. And then that can lead to sleeplessness, and that can lead to irritability and lack of concentration. If you've been in some of my workshops before, you've heard me say that stress makes us stupid. Literally, our brain cannot be, loses its focus when it's concentrating on the stress. And then, of course, as we've already alluded to, health problems. Muscle tensions can lead to headache and backaches. There can be abdominal stomach problems. Colds and flu can be more rampant. And worst case scenario are things like stroke and heart disease. When I was a caregiver, as I look at this list, I had all but 3 of these. So this list really showed me the effects of stress that I was succumbing to while caring for Charles. And after Charles died, I got a good case of shingles. I know how hard it is to manage and cope with the stress of the tremendous burden of caregiving. But keep an eye out for these warning signals, and because they are red flags alerting you that you need to do something about your stress. It can't wait. And I'd also put up there things like behavioral issues, things like how you think and feel, as well as physical issues. I'd like to structure our webinar today, getting ideas on how to cope with this stress around these 4 A's. I learned the 4A model for coping with stress a long time ago in my health promotion career. I don't know where it originated, though, and I Googled it and couldn't find anyone saying who developed it. But many have adopted it as a model to understand how to manage stress. I developed the structure of this particular content for this particular webinar from an article from Phil Sweet. So we're going to go over each of these 4 A's individually. They are to avoid, to alter the situation, to adapt, and accept. So as we go through these are going to be ideas of how to cope with your stress. I'd like you to jot down the ones, anything that you think would be helpful for you on this journey to make it a little less stressful. So the first A is to avoid unnecessary stress. You might be surprised with the number of stressors that you can actually eliminate. So when you can and when it's appropriate, consider avoiding stress. But be aware that there are some stressors that you should not avoid. Sometimes we need to confront them in a proactive way. So you need to kind of distinguish, what can I avoid and what do I really need to tackle? But as we look at what stressors could be avoided, one technique is to learn to say no. You might be surprised with the number of stressors you can eliminate if you learn to say no. If you're like me, though, you struggle with this. I kept taking on more and more at work and home, as I knew I could do each individual task. That was not a problem. But it was the accumulation of all of these tasks that became overwhelming. So I encourage you to think about the tasks and responsibilities you say yes to. You're doing it every day, right? Make a list of them and then decide which ones and what new ones that might pop up down the road that you might say no to. For instance, some caregiving and household tasks could be delegated to someone else, another family member, a friend, or a professional caregiver, or a homekeeper. If you say yes only to what you really want and really need to do, you'll start to avoid feeling resentful and then that overwhelmed feeling that's going to happen. So this skill can be an important strategy for you going forward. Practice saying no. Another great way to avoid unnecessary stress is to stay away from people who bring you down, those negative people, right? The ones who stress you out. Minimize your time with them or avoid it altogether. Instead, get around people who pick you up, who make you feel more optimistic and positive. So think about the people in your life. List the ones who stress you out, and then be conscious of avoiding them or spending at least as little time as possible with them. Minimize your time with them. I have a friend whose husband is going through chemo for prostate cancer. And this her husband's daughter, is a real nervous Nelly and is constantly emailing them. They don't live near each other, emailing, asking about worst case scenario, and it's driving my friend crazy. So the best thing for her is just not even to open up those text messages or emails and try to avoid that. Also, don't let the environment get to you. So controlling your environment is another way to avoid stress. As an example, the evening news may make you anxious. So it might make sense to turn the TV off or change stations and just watch a sitcom. You know, you have enough stress coming from the difficult caregiving circumstances. You don't need to take on the rest of the world's stress too. It might interest you, but you don't need to take it on. Think about what else makes you anxious in the day. Is there a way to avoid those stressors? Excuse me. For example, to avoid traffic, maybe schedule your doctor's appointments and your grocery shopping and stuff in mid-morning and early afternoon. Or if you hate to food shop, experiment with online grocery shopping. Or have a friend do it for you instead. A lot of friends want to help you out. That may be one way they could. So control your environment. Stop and be alert during the day to your time wasters and things that just eat up, the valuable time that you have. Once you identify them, avoid falling into their trap. These are usually things that are easy to do. They may make us feel good getting them done, but they don't really help you meet the most important goals and tasks of the day. So, for some people, it's getting on social media frequently or spending time on the unimportant emails that you get in the course of the day. So once you identify your time wasters, think about what you can do to avoid them or redirect around them. I think another time waster is waiting in a doctor's office, right? So what can you do to be, maybe you can take some stuff that you really need to get done as you know you're going to be sitting there for a half hour or so. So plan ahead for that. Please know, though, that there is a difference between time wasters and time for renewal and creativity. So make sure to keep time for the latter. So in regard to avoid, think about your life and your caregiving. What could you avoid in order to reduce some stress from ever entering your world? We're trying to just stop it before it even becomes a part of your list of to-dos and issues. So avoid. Think about any way that you can avoid unnecessary stress. The next day is alter. Alter the situation. So if you can't avoid a stressful situation, try to alter it. How can you change things so you can minimize stress in the future? Altering a situation often involves changing the way you communicate and operate in your daily life. So one way to alter the situation is to be more assertive. It's not good to just be a passenger in this journey. It helps to deal with problems head on, doing our best to anticipate and prevent them. This may mean having some of those difficult conversations about the care limits you need to set. Or like me, insisting on professional aids even when Charles pushed back. I needed to alter the overwhelming day-to-day caregiving task and give some of them to a professional. So I had to be assertive there. I've known of loved ones who insist on the caregiver to always stay present and not leave the house without them. I don't know if that applies to you. And I just got an email today about a woman whose husband wants her to go to bed when she does. And she wants to stay up a couple extra hours just to have time for herself. But he is so insistent. So this is when we need to be assertive. If the caregivers do leave the house, then you feel guilty, right? But you deserve to use assertiveness to get that time away from your loved one, no matter what temper tantrum they may display. And talk to your doctors and nurses about that. They're to really work on a plan. But most of us just need to practice being more assertive. Another way to alter the situation is to learn how to express your feelings instead of letting them get bottled up inside. And then that causes resentment to build up. So try to communicate your feelings. If you're dealing with dementia or someone who doesn't have great executive function, this may be impossible. But give it a try. Some of you will find it to work. Use I statements. You've probably heard that before when you're trying to express what you're going through and feeling. So something like when you're talking to your loved one or someone else that you need to deal with, I feel frustrated with XYZ. Is there something we can do to reduce that together? So that's using an I statement to express your feelings. Don't let them get bottled up. To alter the situation, it helps if you can learn to be flexible and willing to compromise, especially if you have a tendency to always want to be in control. If you and your loved one are willing to bend at least a little, you'll have a good chance of finding a happy middle ground. So if you have to be in control, look at an opportunity to be a little more flexible. Look for some and try it. And we could all benefit from managing our time better as a way to alter the situation of our stress. Poor time management just adds to our stress. The best skills I've found to manage time is to constantly prioritize your goals, your tasks, and even your relationships. Then use your precious time only on the most important things. Realize that you can never get everything done on our to-do list. There's always going to be stuff left. So that means dropping the unimportant items or relationships off the list. Not having to spend time on those unimportant tasks and relationships can reduce the constant feeling of being overwhelmed to give you more time for the things and the people that are important to you. So continually, constantly reprioritize. To help prioritize, try this activity. On a piece of paper, draw 2 columns. In one of the columns, write down the 3 things you want to do more of. Those are your top priorities. In the other column, of all the things that you've been spending your time on, write down 3 things that you really could do less of. So now you have an idea of what needs more attention and what you can drop off your list. One of the things I had to give up as Charles's disease progressed was working 50 to 60 hours a week. I continued to work throughout Charles's disease. I was only in my 40s. I did this because I loved my job. I liked working those long hours was fun. I love what our team was creating. But with Charles's illness, I needed to alter my situation by reducing my work hours to just 40 and delegating some of the tasks at work to others on my team. And they actually loved it. It gave them a chance to grow in their careers. So think about, how can you be more assertive and expressing your feelings, maybe being a little more flexible, and certainly managing your time better as a way to alter the situation to reduce stress. Before we do the third A, which is to adapt, let me tell you about an important study. This is from a psychological researcher who found, in looking at all the studies on happiness, that only 10% of our happiness is due to the external circumstances around us, like a death, financial problems, or our loved one's illness. So only 10% of our happiness is impacted by that. So where's the other 90%? Well, 50% is how we see the world based on our heredity. So some of us were born more optimistic, some of us were born more pessimistic, and we can't change that. That 50% is fixed. However, with the 10%, with the external things, 50% is what we inherited. That still leaves 40%. All of us have this 40%. That's what we can control with our own attitudes and our own choices. So, what is an appropriate way to react without overreacting? Is the problem really as big as it initially seemed? Is there a healthy way to respond to it? We can choose our responses. So if you can't change or alter the stressor and you can't avoid it, then the third A of adapting to the stressor could be helpful. It means changing yourself and changing your attitude toward the stressors around you. So how can we do that? So we can use our 40% to reframe the problems and stressors you are facing. Try to view stressful situations from a more positive perspective. For instance, if your loved one's disease is causing every little task to take twice as long, and I bet it is, instead of being frustrated, which is a normal response, reframe your thoughts to be thankful for the patience it's teaching you. What opportunities and growth could a stressful situation give you? That's another way to reframe your thinking. I had a ton of caregiving issues that could have been helped by reframing. For instance, Charles went through a spell of yelling, just all day long. And it was really very wearing. And we didn't know what was causing it, so we're still trying to figure that out. Initially, I responded emotionally to it, and one day even yelled back as loud as I could right into his face. I was really embarrassed by that reaction and was then able to reframe and tell myself why maybe Charles was doing this yelling. Maybe it was coming from some fear, or maybe from hallucinations from the medications, which I do believe was happening, or from his understandable frustrations as his abilities to do things for himself were gone, and he was unable to speak clear enough for us to understand him. All very frustrating. So thinking about this from reframing my thoughts from Charles's perspective allowed me to accept and understand all of that a little bit better. That's a way to adapt. Another way to adapt is to try to gain perspective by looking at the big picture. With so many issues and stressful situations while caregiving, does every little thing need to upset you? Can you let some of these roll off your back and just say, oh well? One example from my caregiving was when Charles constantly had incontinence problems. There were times when urine was going everywhere, and some of those were caused by my clumsiness. I wanted to scream out with frustration, and I yelled at myself for being so stupid. I remember one time at a movie theater in a family, a handicapped bathroom. Charles had to pee into a cup, and I put the cup on the sink, and before I know it, as I was getting him dressed back up, I knocked that urine all over that bathroom floor. So, it's normal to feel frustrated and think, oh, I'm so stupid. But that kind of response wasn't really helpful. In that situation, I might have benefited from looking at the big picture to realize that my act of clumsiness will not matter next week, in a month, or a year. I would have been better focusing my energy elsewhere. The big picture was that Charles was still here with me, and he was still having a meaningful impact on others. Another way to adapt to the stressor is to consider adjusting unrealistic, perfectionistic standards. Does everything need to be done perfectly? When is good enough okay? Do you need to vacuum and dust twice a week on top of all these extra caregiving responsibilities, as an example? Could you think of doing things like Subway sandwiches and some quick meals instead of the typical family dinners that you'd like to make? Those are all ways to get rid of those perfectionistic things and find ways to make things a little easier. And finally, use your 40% to focus on the positives as a way to adapt to your caregiver stress. Try to focus on what brings you joy. When the grandkids come, or you've got a little mini vacation, or just maybe the puppy dog that you have. Think about what you appreciate in life. An activity I like to ask people to do is, at the end of each day, ask yourself what went well. That's a way to focus on those positives, then savor on all those good things that went well. I know you'll find them if you start to look for them. So that's a great activity to do to get focused on the positives. I love this quote that circulated around on a Facebook page. Was it a bad day, or was it a bad 5 minutes that you milked all day? Think about that. So from time to time in our lives, we will just have things that we cannot change. And for those, we need to simply accept them. That's our 4th A. This is absolutely the case when we are caring for a chronically or terminally ill loved one. Acceptance may be difficult, but in the long run, it's easier than railing against a situation you can't change. So don't try to control the uncontrollable. Charles developed his rare neurological disease at the age of 45. It progressed over 5 years, slowly taking away all of his abilities and finally his life. We could not change that. But we could change our attitude to accept it and use every opportunity we had to give Charles the best rest of life as possible, which is what we did. Guys, we can go crazy with the stress of trying to control the uncontrollable. It can only make us angry and resentful. Instead, accept these things. Look for meaning or the gifts that these struggles bring. I know you'll find them if you look. Another opportunity to accept is when we make mistakes. While we can't undo that mistake, it's usually not the end of the world. We can learn from it, or we can ask others for forgiveness instead of spending our precious time punishing ourselves over the mistake. And I've learned the hard way about the power of forgiveness. So when I didn't forgive someone, that hurt me. It didn't really hurt the person. She didn't even know, right? So free yourself from the negative energy of not forgiving someone and learn to move on. If the issue is really terrible that someone did to you, then do what Maya Angelou did for people who abused her. She changed the word around and to, instead of forgive, to give for. And what she would do would be do a kind act for someone else as a way to do forgiveness when she couldn't truly forgive that terribly abusive person. She's got a great quote. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself to forgive. Forgive everybody. And another way to accept what we can't control is to share our feelings with others. Talk to a trusted friend, join a support group, or meet with a professional therapist. I had a friend who I got with, and it made a big difference to me. And then once I had hospice, I had a therapist who came to my home to help me deal with my feelings and fears. So expressing your feelings can be cathartic and can help you change a situation and help relieve and accept it. So think about these ways to accept the things that you don't have control over. Now, I said we had 4 A's, and I'm going to throw in this 5th one that is sometimes used, which is to adopt a healthy lifestyle as a way of coping. This is just your baseline to nurture yourself. So I hope you'll make these a priority. Let me go through them real quickly. Make time for fun and relaxation, even if it's little things like taking a walk, listening to music, catching a comedy, playing with your pet. Simple little things that you can use, even things for relaxation such as just taking some deep breaths. Exercise, it actually eats up the stress hormones and can be as effective as an antidepressant for mildly depressed people. So, boy, try to find time to fit some of it in. Eating well keeps you strong, and when you're not eating well, it just makes you feel more stressful. And then getting enough sleep. Make it a priority, and then if you find that you can't fall asleep or stay asleep, try some of the tricks of the trade, which is taking deep breaths, doing some counting, maybe count down from 10 with the deep breaths. You can recite lyrics to songs. That has really helped me a lot in getting back to sleep. I do America the Beautiful, and I visualize the mountains and the seas. If you can't go back to sleep, read for a little bit to get sleepy again, and have a pad of paper there to jot down your worries. So I hope you found some things in these 4 A's, plus the 5th one of adopting a healthy lifestyle, that you can use for the stress that's going to inevitably be there for you. So think about what we've talked about. I hope you've picked 1 or 2 of these tips that you're going to really focus on and try, and make that your action plan. Make it a ritual that you do on a regular basis. So now, before I give you my final quote, I'd like to turn it back to Catherine to look at your comments and questions. Catherine?
All right, so just as a reminder, to send a question, please type them into the questions box, which you'll find on the right side panel, and then hit send. Now, first off, Janet, you had asked for some stressors from people, so we did get a couple of those in that I'd like to read. The first one is this gentleman says that he's housebound is one of his big stressors.
Yeah.
And then the next person we have, their spouse is not helping, trying to work while caregiving, and compatible care recipient.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then the last one on that was talking about a caregiver that was supposed to be helping her out for half an hour, and it didn't look like that was working out.
Yeah, sometimes. So let's look at these real quickly. Being housebound, I think I talked a little bit about that earlier, and that's where it may help to be assertive and find people that, even if your loved one doesn't want people, find people that will come and whether it's friends, family, a volunteer agency, people from your community, your faith community, who will come even and just sit with your loved one so you can get out, because that is a terrible feeling of being housebound. Um, a combative person is very hard, and if the disease is causing the combativeness, it's even harder. But I think there's a lot of trying to adapt to the situation, a lot of self-talk to get your emotion out of it and fight only the battles that need to be fought. Let go of a lot of battles that you don't need to fight. In fact, really think about fighting the battles that only are in relation to your loved one's safety. Other things, let go if you can. And people are your spouse, your loved one isn't going to be helpful in many cases, and it feels unfair, and it is unfair, but sometimes that's the reality. So again, be assertive to find other help. So I think I got to most of those. Any questions, Catherine?
We do have, well, kind of two questions here. We have one, could you reiterate the Phil Sweet article that you mentioned?
Oh, yeah. I just Googled the 4 A's, and Phil Sweet was someone that came up when I Googled the 4 A's. And he just had a great list of things. Most of them I've shared with you today under each of these topics of adopt and adapt and that sort of thing.
Okay. We got another. Amy says, thank you so much for the 4 A's. Very, very helpful.
Oh, good.
And then we have someone else says she's battling her husband's bad attitude 24/7.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And this is reality for some of you. Some of you have very compliant loved ones, which is great. You got other stressors, but those of you that are dealing with a combative or a someone who has a really bad attitude or is a negative pessimist, it's very hard. I mean, you can't change somebody else. It's really impossible. You can try to help them look at the positive. So one thing to ask them is, well, what's going well? They may twist it on you, but keep pushing. What's going well? And get them to focus on something that's going well. And then learn to be assertive. As I said, pick your battles. And I think it could be helpful to get professional help. I needed that professional help. I couldn't find the time to get it until we had hospice, but if there's any way to get some kind of professional help, or I would say at least get a friend that you can talk to on the phone and share and just dump. Someone who's willing to let you dump and just dump it all out so you've got a way to at least express it. But I really feel sad and sorry for all of you that have to deal with the bad attitude. I did. Charles was a wonderful person, but this disease brought some bad things out, and they're hard. So continue to think about being assertive, being keeping your needs, avoiding, get out of the house, get someone in there so you can get out so that you don't have to be around it 24/7. So that would be my best advice, I think. Catherine?
All right. The last question we have, or comment, I guess, is right along that same vein. This person's loved one is combative and resist caregivers, has actually threatened to, quote unquote, forcibly eject them. And when I am assertive, he becomes combative with me.
Yeah. I think I have heard of this in the past, and it sort of depends on where someone is in their disease, etc. First of all, don't take it personally when they resist when you insist. Your well-being is as important as their safety and well-being. I have known people to eject. So another thing to think about, first of all, insist on what you need. But another thing to think about is, are there ways for you to get help that wouldn't be maybe direct caregiving for him? For instance, can you get someone to do your housework? Can you get someone to go do your shopping? Can you get someone to help with the yard work. Things that are now falling on you that you could give up that aren't direct care to him that will still give you that extra help. But what I found, now this isn't the case with everybody, what I found, Charles really pushed back on wanting caregivers. And I remember when we had the first caregiver was a nursing student, and he said, she's just a child. And of course it was a woman. It's a woman and she's just a child. And he was just beside himself. But I have to tell you, in 2 weeks, it was not an issue. He fell right in line with it. So, I don't know if your husband has continued to be combative over really working hard on this. And in that case, you're really facing a hard situation. But I would say to most people, they'll be combative. It's going to be hard. But once you get over the hump, once you've done it and you've gone a few weeks, they get used to it. So you get over that. So I hope that will be your experience. And otherwise, you've got to find time for yourself, people that you can chat with, and people to support you in the midst of what is so hard when you're one-on-one with your loved one and it's so negative. So I wish everybody a lot of strength in that. Catherine?
All right. So I want to remind you that Janet will be presenting the next webinar on Tuesday, September 19th. The topic is Feel Empowered While Caregiving. Watch for the link to register in the follow-up email that you will get after this webinar. As I mentioned earlier, Janet's products are available on her website, www.affirmyourself.com, or from Amazon or your local bookstore. And now I'll turn it back over to Janet for her final quote.
Thanks, Catherine. So I wanted to give you this quote by Terry Guillemetz, a U.S. quotation anthologist. Stress is the trash of modern life. We all generate it. But if you don't dispose of it properly, it will pile up and overtake your life. With that, I want to thank Catherine for helping me today and want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank those of you with questions. Here is my email address, janet@affirmyourself.com. So some of you who wrote questions, or if you didn't have a chance to write them down, please email me. I'd be happy to respond and give you my best 2 cents worth in this. And I hope that you will try to use those 4 A's as you're dealing with your caregiver stress. And with that, we'll say good night. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.